There is a story so powerful that it has shaped entire civilizations, a story that has been told and retold for thousands of years, yet still holds secrets that many have never truly understood. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast sea, with an army closing in behind you and no escape in sight, and then witnessing the impossible unfold before your very eyes. This is not legend, this is not myth. This is the life of a man chosen by Allah, a man whose name echoes more in the Quran than any other human being. Musa, peace be upon him, is not just a figure of history. He is a living message, a mirror that reflects truth, struggle, and unwavering faith. But here is the question that changes everything. What if the version of his story you have heard is incomplete? And what if the Quran reveals details that reshape everything you thought you knew? Before we go deeper into this journey, take a moment and connect with this message. Tell me where you are watching from, and if your heart is drawn to learning more about Islam, make sure you subscribe and stay with us, because what you are about to hear is something you will not forget. The story does not begin with strength or victory. It begins with fear, tension, and a decree that shook an entire nation. In Egypt, under the rule of Pharaoh, a tyrant who did not merely claim power, but claimed divinity itself, there was a growing anxiety that something was about to disrupt his control. A prophecy had reached him, a warning that a child from among the children of Israel would rise and become the cause of his downfall. Pharaoh did not hesitate. He responded with brutality, issuing a command that every newborn boy among the Israelites must be killed. Imagine the weight of that fear, mothers carrying life inside them while knowing that the moment their child takes his first breath, it could also be his last. Homes filled with silence, streets heavy with grief, and a community living under the shadow of constant terror. Yet even in the middle of such darkness, something extraordinary was already unfolding, something beyond human planning, beyond fear, beyond oppression. Among those mothers was a woman whose heart was about to be tested in a way that defies imagination. The mother of Musa was not given a strategy. She was given something far greater. She was given inspiration directly from Allah. The Quran tells us that she was guided to do something that no ordinary mother would ever do unless her faith was anchored in something unshakable. She was told to nurse her child, and when she feared for him, to place him in a chest and cast him into the river. Think about that for a moment, not as a story, but as a reality. A mother placing her newborn baby into the flowing current of a river, not knowing where it would carry him, not seeing what lies ahead, but trusting completely in the promise of Allah. This was not desperation, this was submission. Allah did not leave her without reassurance. He promised her that the child would be returned to her and that he would become one of the messengers. That promise transforms the entire moment. What looks like loss is actually protection. What looks like danger is actually divine design. And then the current of the river carries the child not away from power, but directly into it. The chest reaches the very palace of Pharaoh, the man who ordered the death of children like him. It is almost impossible to imagine a greater contrast, from the fragile hands of a terrified mother to the gates of the most powerful ruler in the land. But this is where the story reveals its depth. When the chest is opened, it is not hatred that fills the room. It is something unexpected. The wife of Pharaoh sees the child, and her heart softens in a way that cannot be explained by logic alone. She pleads for his life, saying that he could be a comfort for them, that he should not be killed. In that moment, the decree of a tyrant is overruled by the will of Allah, and the very household that sought to destroy him becomes the place that raises him. This is where the story begins to challenge the way we think about power and control. Pharaoh believed he was in charge of everything, that his command could shape reality, that his authority was absolute. But the Quran shows us something else entirely, that the one he feared most was being raised under his own roof, eating from his table, growing within his walls, protected by a system that was meant to eliminate him. There is a precision in this that goes beyond coincidence. It is a reminder that no matter how powerful someone appears, they are never outside the control of Allah. Musa grows up surrounded by wealth, status, and influence, yet his heart is not attached to it. He is prepared quietly, without announcement, without recognition, for a role that will shake the very foundations of the empire that raised him. As he grows, there is a sense that he does not fully belong to the world around him. He sees things differently, feels things differently, and this becomes clear in a moment that changes everything. One day, he enters the city at a time when people are unaware, and he witnesses a conflict between two men, one from his own people and one from the Egyptians. The tension is immediate, the injustice is visible, and Musa steps in to intervene. What happens next is sudden and irreversible. He strikes the Egyptian, and the man falls lifeless. It is a moment that carries immense weight, not because it defines Musa as flawed, but because it reveals his humanity. The Quran does not hide this, it does not soften it. It presents it with honesty, and then shows what comes next, which is even more important. Musa does not run from responsibility. He does not justify his action. He turns immediately to Allah and admits his wrongdoing. He says that he has wronged himself and asks for forgiveness. This moment is powerful because it shows the nature of true strength, not the absence of mistakes, but the willingness to recognize them and return to Allah without delay. And Allah forgives him. That forgiveness is not just a relief, it is a turning point. It prepares Musa for what is to come, because leadership in Islam is not built on perfection, it is built on sincerity, humility, and a constant connection to Allah. But the consequences of that moment begin to unfold quickly. The next day, Musa sees the same man again, involved in another conflict, and it becomes clear that the situation is escalating. Word begins to spread, and soon Musa realizes that his life is in danger. The same palace that raised him is now a place he cannot return to safely. A man comes running, warning him that the leaders are plotting against him, urging him to leave immediately. And just like that, the one who was raised in comfort is forced into exile, leaving behind everything he knew. This transition is not just physical, it is spiritual. Musa leaves Egypt not as a prince, but as a fugitive, not knowing where he will go, not knowing what awaits him. Yet even in this uncertainty, there is a quiet trust. The story slows down here, allowing us to see that sometimes the greatest transformations happen away from the spotlight, in moments of isolation, in periods of hardship, where the soul is refined and the heart is prepared. What seems like loss is actually preparation. What feels like displacement is actually positioning. And this is where the deeper truth begins to emerge. The story of Musa in Islam is not just about events. It is about meaning. Every moment carries a lesson, every challenge carries a purpose, and every turn reveals something about the relationship between human effort and divine will. When you look closely, you realize that nothing in this story is random. The fear, the river, the palace, the mistake, the exile, all of it is part of a carefully designed path leading to something far greater than Musa himself. And as the story continues, it will become clear that this is not just the story of one man. It is a message for anyone who has ever felt lost, afraid or uncertain, reminding them that even in the most unexpected places, Allah is in control, guiding, protecting, and preparing something beyond what we can see. The moment that would reshape Musa's life forever did not arrive with warning. It unfolded in a single breath, in a single movement, in a single decision that could never be taken back. He had grown within the walls of power, surrounded by the machinery of a kingdom that oppressed his own people, yet his heart never fully belonged to that world. There was always a tension beneath the surface, a quiet awareness that he stood between two realities, one of privilege and one of suffering. And then one day, that tension broke into action. He entered the city at a time when the streets were less crowded, when the noise of daily life had softened, and in that moment of stillness he encountered a scene that would pull him directly into conflict. A man from his own people was being overpowered by an Egyptian, and the injustice of it was immediate, raw, impossible to ignore. Musa did not stand back and observe. He stepped forward, driven by a sense of responsibility that overrode hesitation. What happened next was not planned. It was instinctive. He struck the Egyptian, intending to stop the vom, but the force of that moment was greater than expected, and the man fell lifeless. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. This was not victory. This was not justice completed. This was a turning point filled with consequence. Musa immediately understood the gravity of what had happened. The Quran captures his reaction with profound honesty, showing that he did not attempt to excuse himself or shift the blame. Instead, he turned inward and upward at the same time, recognizing that he had wronged himself. He called upon Allah with humility, asking for forgiveness, and this is where the depth of his character becomes clear. He did not allow pride to take root. He did not let the moment define him as hardened or reckless. He softened, he reflected, and he returned to Allah, and Allah forgave him. That forgiveness is not a small detail. It is the foundation of what comes next, because it shows that even in moments of error, the door of mercy remains open for those who are sincere. But the world does not pause for reflection. The consequences of that action began to ripple outward almost immediately. The next day, Musa found himself drawn again into the reality of conflict, seeing the same man from his people involved in another dispute. This time, something felt different. There was a sense that the situation was escalating beyond control, that eyes were beginning to notice, that whispers were starting to spread. When Musa stepped in again, the man he tried to help reacted in a way that exposed everything, accusing him openly and unintentionally revealing what had happened the day before. In that instant, the hidden became known. The weight of secrecy shattered and danger closed in. Then came the warning, sudden and urgent. A man approached Musa with news that could not be ignored, telling him that the leaders were discussing his fate, that they were planning against him, that the safety he once knew had vanished. There was no time to negotiate, no time to explain, only time to move. And so Musa made a decision that would change everything. He left. He walked away from the palace that raised him, from the identity that protected him, from the only life he had known. He stepped into uncertainty, with nothing but his faith and his awareness that Allah was watching over him. This was not a strategic retreat, it was a complete transformation. The one who had lived among power was now alone, exposed and vulnerable, moving through the land without protection, without resources, without any clear destination. As he journeyed, the reality of his situation began to settle in. The desert does not comfort. It strips away everything unnecessary. It forces a person to confront themselves, to feel their weakness, to recognize their dependence. Musa walked with exhaustion in his body and questions in his heart, yet even in that state, there was something steady within him, a trust that had not been broken. When he finally reached the land of Madian, he encountered another scene, one that would open the door to a new phase of his life. At a well, where shepherds gathered to water their flocks, he noticed two women standing aside, holding back, unable to push through the crowd. He did not know them, he did not owe them anything, yet he approached and asked why they were waiting. Their response was simple and honest. They could not compete with the others, and they had no one to help them. Without hesitation, Musa stepped forward once again, but this time his strength was guided by wisdom, not urgency. He moved through the crowd, cleared space, and watered their flocks with quiet determination. There was no display, no demand for recognition, just action rooted in character. When the task was done, he did not linger. He stepped back into the shade, alone again, and in that moment he turned to Allah with words that reveal his state completely. He admitted his need, his exhaustion, his dependence, asking for any good that Allah would send his way. It is a moment of pure vulnerability, not weakness, but honesty. And it is in that honesty that the next door opens. One of the women returned, walking with a sense of modesty and purpose, inviting him to meet her father. What follows is a shift from isolation to stability, from uncertainty to provision. Musa is welcomed, listened to, and offered not only safety, but also a place within a family. He shares his story, and instead of judgment, he finds understanding. He is offered work, responsibility, and eventually marriage. Years pass in this new environment, years that are often overlooked but are deeply significant. These are years of quiet growth, of learning patience, of building a life away from the intensity of Egypt. Musa is not idle. He is being prepared, shaped without even realizing the full extent of what lies ahead. And then, when the time is right, when the foundation has been laid, when the heart has been strengthened, the next moment arrives, one that will redefine everything. As Musa travels with his family, he notices a fire in the distance, a flicker of light in the darkness of the desert night. It seems like a simple thing, a source of warmth, a possible guide, something practical. He tells his family to stay behind as he approaches it, expecting nothing more than comfort or direction. But what he encounters is beyond anything he could have imagined. As he draws closer, the ordinary dissolves into the extraordinary. The fire is not just fire. The place is not just a place. He hears a voice calling him, not from the sky, not from a distance, but from that very presence before him. Allah speaks to Musa directly. This is one of the most profound moments in all of Islamic tradition. Musa is chosen, not gradually, not through human recognition, but through direct communication from the Creator. He is told that he is in a sacred valley, that he must remove his sandals, that he is being addressed by the Lord of all worlds. The weight of that moment cannot be overstated. This is not a dream, this is not a vision in the abstract sense. This is a direct encounter that transforms Musa from a man in exile into a messenger of Allah. He is given a mission that will take him back to the very place he fled from, back to Pharaoh, but this time not as a fugitive, not as someone running, but as someone sent. In that moment, everything aligns. The fear he experienced, the mistake he made, the exile he endured, the years of quiet living, all of it converges into purpose. The story reveals its deeper layer, showing that what seemed like scattered events were actually connected steps leading to this exact point. Musa stands there, aware of the magnitude of what he is being asked to do, and yet supported by something greater than himself. This is where the journey truly begins, not in the palace, not in the river, not even in the desert, but in that moment of direct connection with Allah, where a man is transformed into a messenger, and where the path ahead, though filled with challenge, is illuminated by certainty. Standing in that sacred valley, having just heard the words of Allah, Musa was not filled with arrogance or sudden confidence. He was filled with awareness. He understood the weight of what he had been given. This was not a simple task, not a message to deliver among friends or a quiet call to those already inclined toward truth. He was being sent back to the very man who once held absolute power over his life. The same Pharaoh whose system forced his mother into fear, whose palace had raised him, and whose authority he had fled to escape. The mission was clear, but its difficulty was undeniable. Musa did not question the command itself. He did not hesitate in obedience, but he spoke honestly about his own limitations. He admitted his fear, recalling the past incident that could still be used against him, acknowledging that his speech was not as fluent as he wished it to be. This moment is deeply human, showing that even the greatest of prophets did not pretend to be beyond weakness. Instead, they brought their concerns directly to Allah, trusting that He would respond. And Allah did respond, not with dismissal, but with reassurance. Musa was told that he would be supported, that his fear would not define his outcome. Yet Musa went further, asking that his brother Harun be sent with him, someone whose speech was clearer, someone who could strengthen him in the face of such an overwhelming task. This request reveals something profound about leadership in Islam. It is not about standing alone in pride. It is about recognizing the value of partnership, of support, of shared responsibility. Allah accepted this request, appointing Harun as a prophet alongside Musa, strengthening them as a pair. They were not sent as isolated individuals, but as a unified force, each complementing the other. This is a powerful reminder that even in missions of great importance, seeking help is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of wisdom. With that, the direction was set. Musa and Harun were to go to Pharaoh and speak to him with clarity, but also with a certain gentleness in approach. Not because Pharaoh deserved softness, but because the message itself was meant to invite reflection before confrontation. They were to call him to recognize the oneness of Allah, to abandon his false claim of divinity, and to release the children of Israel from oppression. Imagine the courage required to walk into the court of a ruler who not only controlled armies and wealth, but who had convinced an entire society that he was divine. This was not simply a political challenge, it was a direct challenge to the very foundation of Pharaoh's identity. When Musa and Harun finally stood before Pharaoh, the atmosphere must have been charged with tension. This was not a quiet meeting. It was a moment where truth and falsehood stood face to face. Pharaoh, surrounded by his court, his advisors, his symbols of power, looked at Musa not as a messenger, but as someone he once knew, someone he believed he had control over. He reminded Musa of his upbringing in the palace, as if to say, "You owe everything to me." He brought up the incident from the past, the death of the Egyptian, using it as a tool to undermine Musa's credibility. But Musa did not retreat into guilt or defensiveness. He acknowledged the past, but he did not allow it to define the present. He shifted the focus back to the message, making it clear that what mattered now was not his history, but the truth he had been sent with. The dialogue between Musa and Pharaoh was one of the most striking exchanges in the Quran. Pharaoh demanded to know who this Lord was that Musa spoke of. Musa responded with calm certainty, describing Allah as the Lord of the heavens and the earth and everything between them, the one who created and sustains all things. Pharaoh attempted to ridicule this, turning to those around him as if to mock the idea, trying to reduce the conversation to something trivial. But Musa did not get drawn into distraction. He remained focused, grounded, unwavering. The contrast between them is clear. One speaks from truth, the other from arrogance. When words were not enough, signs were shown. Musa was given miracles that were not illusions, not tricks, but clear demonstrations of power beyond human capability. He threw his staff, and it transformed into a serpent, not a small or symbolic change, but something undeniable, something that moved, that lived, that could not be explained away as deception. He placed his hand into his garment and brought it out shining with a light that was pure and striking. These were not performances designed to impress, they were proofs meant to awaken. Pharaoh's reaction was predictable yet revealing. Instead of reflecting on what he had witnessed, he labeled it as magic. He accused Musa of being a magician, someone skilled in deception, someone trying to challenge the authority of the state. This is often the response of those who are confronted with truth they are unwilling to accept. They do not engage with it sincerely. They attempt to redefine it in a way that protects their position. Pharaoh then turned to the tools he trusted most, the experts in illusion, the magicians of his kingdom. He called them together, setting the stage for what he believed would be a public defeat of Musa. The day was chosen, the people were gathered, and the magicians arrived with confidence. These were individuals who understood the art of illusion at the highest level. They knew how to manipulate perception, how to create effects that could deceive the eye and the mind. Pharaoh promised them reward, status, closeness to power if they succeeded. Everything was in place for a spectacle, a moment where truth and illusion would be tested in front of a watching crowd. The magicians began, casting their ropes and staffs, creating the appearance of movement, making them seem like serpents slithering across the ground. To the observers, it must have looked convincing, impressive, even intimidating. But then Musa stepped forward. He did not rush. He did not panic, even though the scene before him was intense. He threw his staff as he had been commanded, and what followed changed everything. The staff did not mimic what the magicians had done. It overwhelmed it. It became a reality that consumed their illusions, swallowing what they had presented as deception. In that instant, the difference between human trickery and divine power became undeniable. What happened next is one of the most powerful moments in the entire story. The magicians, the very people who were brought in to discredit Musa, were the first to recognize the truth. They fell into prostration, declaring their belief in the Lord of Musa and Harun. This was not a calculated decision. It was an immediate response born from certainty. They knew their craft, they understood illusion better than anyone, and they saw clearly that what Musa brought was not of that nature. It was real. It was beyond them. It was from Allah. Pharaoh's reaction revealed the depth of his arrogance. Instead of seeing this as a moment to reconsider, he saw it as betrayal. He accused the magicians of conspiring with Musa as if their belief was part of a plot. He threatened them with severe punishment, crucifixion, cutting of hands and feet, attempting to instill fear and regain control. But something had shifted. The magicians who once sought reward from Pharaoh now stood firm in their new belief. They spoke with a courage that only truth can give, telling Pharaoh that no matter what he did, they would not return to falsehood after having seen what they had seen. This moment carries a lesson that resonates deeply. Those who are closest to falsehood are often the ones who can recognize truth most clearly when it appears. The magicians were not scholars of revelation. They were experts in deception, yet their knowledge allowed them to see the difference immediately. It reminds us that guidance is not limited by background or status. It is given to those whose hearts are open to it. And so the confrontation escalated. What began as a call to truth became a clear division between belief and denial. Musa stood firm, supported by his brother, strengthened by revelation, while Pharaoh tightened his grip on power, refusing to yield, refusing to reflect, choosing arrogance over truth. The stage was set for what would come next, a series of events that would shake the very foundations of Egypt, proving once again that no matter how strong falsehood appears, it cannot stand when confronted by the will of Allah. What followed after that moment of public truth was not immediate victory. And this is where the story becomes even more real, more grounded, more relevant to anyone who has ever expected change to come quickly. Pharaoh had seen the signs. His court had witnessed the undeniable. His own chosen magicians had fallen in submission to the Lord of Musa. And yet, nothing changed in his heart. Instead of softening, he hardened even further. This is one of the most striking realities presented in the Quran, that guidance is not simply about seeing miracles. It is about being willing to accept what those miracles point to. Pharaoh chose to reject, not because he lacked evidence, but because he refused to surrender his pride. And so the consequences began to unfold, not as random disasters, but as measured signs, each one carrying a message, each one offering an opportunity to turn back before it was too late. The land of Egypt, once stable and controlled under Pharaoh's command, began to unravel in ways no army could stop. The first waves came as overwhelming floods, waters rising beyond expectation, disrupting homes, destroying crops, reminding everyone that control over nature does not belong to any ruler. When the waters receded, the people might have hoped for relief, but instead came swarms of locusts, devouring what little remained of their food supply, stripping the land bare with relentless hunger. Then came the lice, small but pervasive, spreading discomfort, invading every space, making life unbearable in ways that could not be ignored. Frogs followed, filling homes, appearing in places where they should never be, turning daily life into constant irritation and chaos. And then the water itself, the very source of life, turned into blood, undrinkable, unusable, a clear sign that something far beyond human authority was at work. Each time a new sign appeared, Pharaoh would feel the pressure building, not just from the suffering of his people, but from the undeniable pattern forming before his eyes. He would call upon Musa, asking him to pray to Allah to remove the affliction, promising that he would believe, that he would release the children of Israel, that he would change. And each time, when the relief came, when the hardship was lifted, he broke his promise. It became a cycle of arrogance and temporary submission, of fear followed by denial. This repetition is not just part of the story, it is a lesson about the human condition. There are those who turn to truth only when they are desperate, but once comfort returns, they revert to their old ways, as if the warning never happened. Throughout all of this, Musa remained steady. He did not lose focus. He did not become overwhelmed by the scale of resistance. He continued to deliver the message, continued to call Pharaoh to truth, continued to remind him that power does not belong to him. And eventually, the command came that would bring this phase to its climax. Allah instructed Musa to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt, not in broad daylight, not with confrontation at the gates, but quietly, under the cover of night. This was not a retreat, it was a transition, a movement from oppression toward freedom, guided directly by divine command. Imagine the scene as the night unfolds. Families gathering what little they have, moving silently, hearts filled with a mix of fear and hope. Generations who had lived under slavery, now stepping into uncertainty, not knowing exactly what lies ahead, but trusting in the one who had guided them this far. Musa leads them not as a ruler in the traditional sense, but as a messenger carrying a responsibility that goes beyond logistics or strategy. This is not just a physical journey. It is a test of faith, a moment where belief must translate into action. But Pharaoh is not a man who lets go easily. When he learns that the Israelites have left, his reaction is immediate and furious. This is not just about losing a group of people. It is about losing control, about being challenged, about facing the reality that his authority has been defied. He gathers his forces, mobilizes his army, and sets out in pursuit. The ground shakes with the movement of soldiers, the sound of chariots cutting through the night, a display of power meant to crush any hope of escape. What began as a quiet departure now turns into a race against overwhelming force. As dawn begins to break, the situation becomes clear. The Israelites find themselves at the edge of the sea, a vast expanse of water stretching before them with no visible path forward. Behind them, the army of Pharaoh approaches, closing the distance with every passing moment. Panic spreads among the people. They look at Musa and say what many would say in that moment, that they are trapped, that there is no escape, that the end has come. It is a moment where fear rises to the surface, where the reality of their situation seems impossible to overcome. But Musa does not share their panic. He stands with a calm that can only come from certainty, not in himself, but in Allah. He says with clarity and conviction that Allah is with him and will guide him. These words are not empty reassurance. They are rooted in everything that has happened so far, in every sign, every miracle, every moment of protection that has brought them to this point. And then the command comes again, precise and direct. Musa is instructed to strike the sea with his staff. What happens next is beyond anything human experience can explain. The sea responds, not gradually, not symbolically, but completely. It splits, forming towering walls of water on either side, creating a path where there was none. The ground beneath becomes firm, walkable, a passage opened by the will of Allah. This is not an illusion, not a metaphor. It is a reality witnessed by those present, a moment where the laws of nature submit to the command of their Creator. The Israelites move forward, step by step, between walls of water that stand as silent witnesses to the power of Allah. Behind them, Pharaoh arrives, seeing what has unfolded. For a moment, there is a choice, a final opportunity to reflect, to step back, to recognize what is happening. But arrogance blinds him once again. Instead of seeing the miracle as a sign to stop, he sees it as an opportunity to continue his pursuit. He orders his army to follow, driving forward into the very path that had been opened. It is a decision that reveals the depth of his delusion, believing that what was clearly beyond his control could somehow be used to serve his will. As the last of the Israelites reach the other side, the moment of truth arrives. The sea, which had been held apart, begins to return to its natural state. The walls of water collapse, closing in upon Pharaoh and his army. The same path that had been a means of salvation becomes a place of destruction for those who refuse to see the truth. The sound, the force, the finality of that moment cannot be overstated. It is the end of a regime, the end of a false claim to divinity, the end of a man who believed himself to be above all others. And in those final moments, as the water closes around him, Pharaoh speaks. He declares belief, acknowledging the Lord that Musa had been calling him to all along. But this declaration comes too late. It is not born from sincere reflection, but from the certainty of death. The Quran makes this point clear, that faith at the moment, when the unseen becomes seen, when the consequences are already unfolding, is not the same as faith chosen freely before that point. His words do not save him, because they come after a lifetime of denial, after repeated opportunities to turn back that he consistently rejected. The sea settles, the water returns to its calm state, and what remains is a silence that carries the weight of everything that has just occurred. On one side, a people who have just witnessed their deliverance in the most extraordinary way, standing at the beginning of a new chapter. On the other, the complete collapse of a power that once seemed untouchable. The message is clear, not just for those who lived it, but for anyone who reflects on it. No matter how strong oppression appears, no matter how deeply rooted falsehood seems, when the command of Allah comes, everything changes in an instant. As the water closed over Pharaoh and his army, something remarkable happened in those final, desperate seconds that reveals more about the human condition than perhaps any other moment in this entire story. The man who had spent his life declaring himself a god, the man who had demanded absolute obedience, who had dismissed every sign, every warning, every opportunity to turn back, suddenly found himself stripped of all illusion. There were no armies now, no throne, no symbols of power, no voices praising his name. There was only the undeniable reality of death approaching, fast and unstoppable. And in that moment, clarity came to him. Not gradually, not through reflection over time, but instantly, as the truth he had resisted his entire life became unavoidable. He declared that he believed in the Lord of the children of Israel, acknowledging the very truth that Musa had been calling him to again and again. But this declaration did not carry the weight he might have hoped for. It was not the result of humility, not the fruit of sincere searching, not the outcome of a heart that had softened through reflection. It was the reaction of a man who could no longer deny what was directly in front of him. The Quran makes this moment strikingly clear, that belief at the point when the unseen becomes seen, when the consequences are already unfolding, is not the same as belief chosen freely while there is still time to act upon it. It is as if the door that had been open his entire life suddenly closed at that exact moment. The response that follows from Allah is not one of acceptance, but of exposure, a reminder that Pharaoh had disobeyed for so long and had spread corruption throughout the land. His final words did not erase his past, they revealed it. And yet, even in this moment of rejection, there is a powerful sign left behind for future generations. The body of Pharaoh, preserved and made visible, becomes a symbol, not of glory, but of warning. A man who once stood at the peak of worldly power is reduced to a lesson, a reminder that no matter how high someone rises, they remain completely dependent on the will of Allah. His story does not end with admiration. It ends with reflection, forcing anyone who hears it to ask themselves where they stand when truth is presented to them. Will they accept it while there is still time, or will they delay until it is too late? On the other side of the sea, the children of Israel stood in a state that is difficult to fully describe. They had just witnessed something that defied every expectation, something that transformed fear into safety in an instant. Behind them lay the destruction of the force that had oppressed them for generations, and before them stretched a future they had never experienced. A future without chains, without forced labor, without the constant shadow of fear. This should have been a moment of pure gratitude, a moment where hearts overflowed with recognition of what Allah had done for them. And yet, what unfolds next reveals a deeper, more complex reality about human nature. Freedom, it turns out, is not simply the absence of oppression. It is a test in itself. For generations, these people had lived under control, their choices limited, their environment defined by hardship. Now, suddenly, they were free, and with that freedom came exposure to their own inner state. Not long after their escape, they came across a group of people devoted to idols, figures they worshipped openly, with rituals and practices that were visible and tangible. And something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling repelled by what they saw, instead of recognizing it as falsehood, some among the children of Israel turned to Musa with a request that revealed how deeply influenced they still were by what they had lived through. They asked him to make for them a god like the ones they had just seen. It is almost difficult to comprehend this moment. These were people who had just witnessed the sea split before their eyes, who had seen a tyrant destroyed in a way that left no room for doubt, who had been saved in a manner that could only come from Allah. And yet, so quickly, their understanding wavered. Musa's response was immediate and firm. He did not entertain the request. He did not soften the truth. He told them clearly that they were a people acting in ignorance, that what they were asking for was a return to the very kind of falsehood that had led to oppression in the first place. This moment reveals something essential, that miracles alone do not guarantee lasting faith. A person can witness the extraordinary and still struggle internally if their understanding and their heart are not aligned with truth. As their journey continued, more of these moments began to surface. Complaints arose about food, about comfort, about the conditions of their new life. They compared what they had with what they once had, even though what they had before was tied to oppression. This is one of the most powerful insights in the story, that sometimes people become so accustomed to a certain state, even a harmful one, that when they are removed from it, they feel discomfort, not because the new situation is worse, but because it is unfamiliar. They long for what they know, even if it was not good for them. Musa carried the burden of leading them through this transition, not just physically, but spiritually. His role was not only to guide them from one place to another, but to reshape their understanding, to help them see beyond immediate desires and recognize the bigger picture. This is not an easy task. Leading people who have been conditioned by years of hardship requires patience, strength, and constant reliance on Allah. And Musa demonstrated all of this, continuing to remind them, to correct them, to guide them, even when their responses were difficult. This phase of the story brings forward a truth that is both challenging and deeply relevant. External change does not automatically lead to internal transformation. A person can leave behind a place of oppression, but still carry its author within them. Real freedom requires more than a change in environment. It requires a change in qalb, a shift in understanding, a willingness to let go of old patterns and embrace what is right, even when it feels unfamiliar. And through all of this, the story continues to unfold with a steady reminder that guidance is a process. It is not always immediate, it is not always smooth, and it is not always met with acceptance, but it is always available for those who are willing to engage with it sincerely. The journey of Musa with his people becomes not just a historical account, but a reflection of the ongoing struggle between truth and desire, between clarity and confusion, between what we know is right and what we are used to. It invites every listener to look inward and ask a simple but powerful question. When faced with truth, will I recognize it and hold on to it? Or will I let my habits and my comfort pull me away from it? As the journey continued, a new phase began to unfold, one that would test not their ability to escape oppression, but their ability to remain faithful in the absence of immediate danger. The urgency of survival had passed, the sea had already split, Pharaoh was gone, and now they stood in a space where something deeper was required of them. This is where the story slows down in a way that feels almost deliberate, as if it is inviting reflection. Allah called Musa to ascend the mountain, a place that would become sacred not because of its physical form, but because of what would happen there. Musa was summoned for a meeting unlike anything else, a direct encounter once again with his Lord, where revelation would be given, guidance that would shape the direction of his people for generations. Before leaving, Musa did not abandon his responsibility. He placed his brother Harun in charge, entrusting him with leadership, reminding him to maintain order, to guide the people, to hold them together in his absence. This detail matters because it shows that even in moments of divine appointment, the responsibilities of this world are not ignored. Leadership continues, structure remains, and trust is placed in those who have proven themselves. Then Musa began his ascent, leaving behind the noise of the camp, moving into a space of stillness where the connection between him and Allah would once again take center stage. The experience on the mountain is one of the most profound in Islamic tradition. Musa is given the Torah, a scripture containing guidance, law, clarity, a framework meant to shape a community that had just emerged from generations of oppression. These were not casual instructions, they were comprehensive, addressing belief, behavior, and responsibility. It was a moment of elevation, both literal and spiritual, where Musa stood in a position of closeness to Allah that very few have ever experienced. And yet, even in this moment of honor, something else was unfolding below, something that would reveal the fragility of the people he had left behind. Time passed, and the absence of Musa began to affect the community. Without his presence, without his direct guidance, uncertainty started to grow. Questions turned into whispers, whispers turned into doubt, and into that space of uncertainty stepped a figure whose influence would change everything. A man among them, later known for his role in this event, began to manipulate the situation, using what he had seen and what he understood to create something that would mislead the people. He gathered gold, shaped it into the form of a calf, and introduced it as something worthy of devotion. The object itself was lifeless, but the idea behind it spread quickly, feeding on the lack of strong internal grounding among the people. What is shocking is not just that this happened, but how quickly it happened. These were the same people who had witnessed miracles that defied explanation, who had seen the sea open, who had watched Pharaoh fall, who had been directly guided by a prophet, and yet, in the absence of that prophet, many of them turned to something they could see, something tangible, something that required no patience, no reflection, no inner struggle. This moment exposes a deep truth about human nature, that the pull toward what is visible and immediate can sometimes override what is known to be true, especially when discipline and understanding are not firmly rooted. Harun tried to intervene. He did not remain silent. He warned them, reminded them that they were being tested, that what they were doing was wrong, that their Lord was not this object they had created. But his position was difficult. He was leading people who were becoming increasingly resistant, who were not just confused, but emotionally invested in what they had begun to follow. He feared that pushing too hard might divide them completely, might lead to internal conflict that could be even more destructive. So he continued to advise, to warn, to hold the situation as best as he could, waiting for Musa's return. And then that return came, not quietly, not gradually, but with a force that matched the severity of what had occurred. Musa descended from the mountain carrying the tablets, carrying revelation, carrying guidance. But as he approached, he saw something that shook him deeply. The sound of celebration, the sight of people gathered around an idol, the realization that, in his absence, they had turned away from everything he had taught them. This was not a small mistake. This was a direct betrayal of their covenant with Allah. Musa's reaction was intense, and rightly so. He confronted his people with a clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. He expressed his anger, not as uncontrolled emotion, but as a response to the magnitude of what had happened. He held them accountable, reminding them of the blessings they had received, the signs they had witnessed, the guidance they had been given. And then he turned to Harun, questioning him, asking why he had not stopped this from happening. It is a moment that reveals the pressure of leadership, the expectation of responsibility, and the difficulty of managing a community in crisis. Harun responded with honesty, explaining that he had tried, that he had warned them, that he had feared division, that he had done what he could within the limits of the situation. This exchange between the two brothers is important because it shows that even among the most righteous, there can be moments of tension, of questioning, of needing to understand what happened. But it also shows that this tension is resolved through truth, through communication, through recognition of each other's intentions. Musa then turned his attention to the source of the corruption, confronting the one who had initiated this deviation. The accountability was direct. There was no avoidance, no delay, no attempt to soften the reality of what had been done. This was necessary because allowing such actions to pass without consequence would have undermined the entire foundation of the community. Guidance requires clarity, and clarity sometimes requires firm action. What follows is a process of correction, of restoring order, of bringing the people back to what is right. It is not instant, it is not easy, but it is essential. Musa reestablishes the boundaries, reminds them of their covenant, calls them back to worship Allah alone. The weight of their mistake is made clear, not to crush them, but to awaken them, to ensure that they understand the seriousness of what they had done. This phase of the story carries a powerful lesson that goes beyond its historical setting. It shows that faith is not just about moments of intensity or miraculous events. It is about consistency, about holding on to truth even when it is not immediately reinforced by extraordinary experiences. It shows that leadership requires patience, strength, and the ability to confront difficult situations without losing sight of the ultimate goal. And it shows that communities are tested not only by external challenges, but by internal weaknesses that can surface when guidance is not actively maintained. In the end, what stands out is not just the mistake that was made, but the effort to correct it, the willingness to return, the opportunity for repentance that remains open even after such a serious deviation. The story does not end with failure. It continues with the possibility of redemption, reminding us that no matter how far someone strays, the path back is always there, as long as they are willing to take it. When you step back and look at the life of Musa through the lens of Islamic tradition, something becomes immediately clear. His story is not simply long, it is layered. It is repeated throughout the Quran, not because repetition is needed, but because each retelling reveals something new, something deeper, something that speaks to a different aspect of the human condition. Musa is not presented as a distant historical figure. He is brought forward again and again as a living example of what it means to carry responsibility, to struggle, to lead, to trust, and to remain anchored in truth even when everything around you resists it. Among all the prophets, he stands in a unique position. He is one of the strongest messengers, part of those entrusted with the heaviest responsibilities, and his closeness to Allah is unlike almost anyone else. He is known as the one who spoke directly with Allah, a distinction that is not symbolic but real, grounded in moments where communication occurred without intermediary. This closeness does not make his journey easier. In fact, it seems to make his mission more intense, more demanding, more filled with challenges that test every aspect of his character. He faces a tyrant who claims divinity, a people who struggle with consistency, a path that requires patience at a level few can sustain. And yet, through all of this, he remains steady. Not perfect in the sense of never facing difficulty, but consistent in his return to Allah, in his reliance, in his refusal to compromise the message he was given. The Quran shows him in moments of strength and in moments of strain, asking questions, seeking clarity, expressing concern, and always being guided back to what is right. This balance is what makes his story so powerful. It does not present an unreachable ideal, it presents a model of sincerity, of effort, of resilience. There is also something deeply human in the way Musa interacts with his people. He is not detached from them. He feels their resistance, their complaints, their inconsistencies. He carries their burden, not just as a leader, but as someone who genuinely wants them to succeed, to understand, to hold on to what they have been given. There are moments where his frustration becomes visible, where the weight of guiding a people who repeatedly falter becomes overwhelming. And yet, even in those moments, he does not abandon them. He continues, he corrects, he reminds, he returns to Allah for support. This persistence is part of what defines his greatness, not just the miracles he was given, but the endurance he demonstrated. His story also reveals the nature of communication between the human and the divine, in a way that is rarely seen elsewhere. When Musa speaks to Allah, it is direct, it is clear, it is filled with both reverence and openness. He asks, he listens, he responds. This relationship becomes a source of strength for him, something that anchors him when everything else feels unstable. It is a reminder that guidance is not just about receiving commands. It is about connection, about understanding, about building a relationship with the one who created everything. When you compare this to how Musa is presented in Christianity, the overlap is undeniable, but the distinctions are just as important. Christianity honors Moses as a prophet and a central figure, a lawgiver who led his people and received revelation. There is respect, there is recognition, there is acknowledgement of his role in shaping belief and practice. But Islam places a particular emphasis on aspects that reshape how we understand him entirely. In Islam, every prophet, including Musa, is firmly positioned as a servant of Allah, never elevated to a status that blurs the line between human and divine. The message is always clear. No matter how great the prophet, all power belongs to Allah alone. This clarity affects how the entire story is understood. The miracles of Musa are not seen as acts of personal power, but as signs granted by Allah, demonstrations meant to guide, not to elevate the individual beyond their role. His authority does not come from himself. It comes from the message he carries. This keeps the focus where it belongs, on the oneness of Allah, on the idea that guidance flows from him alone, and that even the greatest among humanity are still dependent on that guidance. Another key difference lies in how the character of Musa is preserved. In Islamic belief, prophets are protected in their role as messengers. They may experience human moments, they may face challenges, but they are not portrayed in ways that undermine their integrity or their mission. This preservation is important because it maintains the trustworthiness of the message they deliver. Musa is shown as sincere, as committed, as someone who embodies the very principles he is calling others to follow. His mistakes, when they occur, are addressed openly, followed by repentance and correction, reinforcing the idea that growth and return to Allah are always possible. Islam also emphasizes the consistency of the message across all prophets. Musa does not come with a new or separate religion. He comes with the same core message that all prophets bring: the worship of one God, the rejection of false idols, the establishment of justice and righteousness. This continuity connects him not only to those who came before him, but also to those who came after, forming a chain of guidance that leads to the final message of Islam. It places Musa within a larger framework, showing that his story is not isolated, but part of a broader narrative that spans human history. When these elements come together, something remarkable happens. The story of Musa becomes more than a comparison between traditions. It becomes a lens through which truth is clarified. It challenges assumptions, it refines understanding, it calls the listener to look beyond surface similarities and engage with the deeper meaning. It asks a question that is both simple and profound: not just what happened, but what does it mean, and what does it demand from us? And perhaps the most powerful realization that emerges from all of this is that Musa's story is not confined to the past. It continues to speak, to guide, to challenge anyone who is willing to reflect on it. It reminds us that closeness to Allah is not about status, but about sincerity. That leadership is not about control, but about responsibility. That truth does not bend to power, and that even in the face of overwhelming opposition, it remains thapped, firm, and unshaken. It invites us to see not just the differences between traditions, but the clarity that Islam brings to the narrative, a clarity that centers everything back to where it belongs: the absolute oneness of Allah, and the purpose of human existence to recognize, worship, and follow that truth with sincerity. When you take in the entire journey of Musa, from the fragile moment of his birth to the overwhelming scenes of confrontation, escape, revelation, and leadership, it becomes impossible to treat his story as something distant or symbolic. It speaks too directly, too powerfully, too personally. The lessons do not sit quietly in the background. They press forward, demanding attention, demanding reflection. This is not simply a story about what happened to one man in a distant land long ago. It is a pattern, a blueprint that continues to unfold in different forms throughout human life. The struggle between truth and falsehood did not end with Pharaoh. It exists in every age, sometimes loudly in the form of oppression and tyranny, and sometimes quietly within the human heart, where decisions are made between what is right and what is easy. One of the most striking lessons that emerges is the nature of courage. Musa was not fearless in the way people often imagine strength. He felt fear. He acknowledged it. He spoke about it openly. But he did not allow that fear to control his actions. Instead, he placed his trust in Allah and moved forward anyway. This is a form of courage that feels real, attainable, something that anyone can connect with. It shows that bravery is not about the absence of fear. It is about choosing to act in alignment with truth despite it. When Musa stood before Pharaoh, he was not relying on his own power. He was relying on the certainty that Allah was with him, and that certainty transformed everything. Then there is the lesson of patience, a patience that is not passive, but active and enduring. Musa faced resistance not only from his enemies, but from his own people. He dealt with complaints, with misunderstandings, with moments that would test even the strongest resolve. And yet, he continued. He did not abandon his mission when it became difficult. He did not lower the standard of truth to make things easier. He remained consistent, returning again and again to the guidance he had been given. This kind of patience is not about waiting without action. It is about continuing to act with purpose, even when the results are not immediate. Trust in Allah runs through every part of his story like a steady current. From the moment his mother placed him in the river to the moment he stood at the edge of the sea with no visible escape, there is a constant theme of reliance on something beyond human control. This trust is not blind. It is built on experience, on witnessing the signs, on recognizing the patterns of divine care and guidance. It teaches that even when the path ahead is unclear, even when the situation seems impossible, there is always a dimension that is beyond what we can see, a plan that unfolds with precision even when we do not understand it fully. Another lesson that stands out is the idea that truth does not depend on numbers. Musa often stood with very few supporters, sometimes even facing resistance from those he was trying to guide. Pharaoh had an entire system behind him, an army, wealth, influence, yet none of that gave his position any real strength in the face of truth. This is a reminder that what is correct is not determined by how many people follow it, but by its alignment with what Allah has revealed. It challenges the tendency to equate popularity with validity, encouraging a deeper evaluation of what is right. And then there is the reality of human weakness, something that is not hidden or ignored in the story, but addressed openly. The children of Israel witnessed miracles, experienced direct guidance, and yet still struggled. They complained, they doubted, they made mistakes. This is not presented to criticize them alone, but to reflect a universal truth about people. Faith is not a one-time achievement. It is something that requires constant attention, constant renewal, constant effort. It can be strengthened or weakened depending on how it is treated. The story invites self-reflection, asking not how others failed, but where we might fall into similar patterns in our own lives. As the journey of Musa reaches its later stages, a deeper realization begins to settle in. His story was never just about confronting Pharaoh or leading a people out of Egypt. It was about establishing a message that would endure, a message that points clearly and consistently toward the oneness of Allah, toward the idea that no power, no system, no individual stands above the Creator. Everything else in the story supports this central truth. The miracles, the challenges, the victories, the setbacks, all of it leads back to this one point. And this is where the story turns from history into something personal. It is no longer about what Musa did, but about what we do with what we have learned. The question is no longer about Pharaoh's arrogance, but about our own moments of resistance when truth is presented to us. It is no longer about the mistakes of a past community, but about how we respond when guidance is given to us clearly. The story holds up a mirror, asking each person to look at themselves honestly, to consider their own relationship with truth, with patience, with trust, with sincerity. There is also a sense of urgency in the way the story concludes. Pharaoh delayed until it was too late, recognizing the truth only when he could no longer act on it. This is not just a detail of the story, it is a warning that carries forward. Time is not unlimited. Opportunities to change, to return, to align with what is right, are not guaranteed to remain open forever. The story encourages immediate reflection, immediate action, not out of fear alone, but out of understanding that the chance to choose truth is itself a gift. And yet, alongside that urgency, there is also hope. Musa's journey shows that even in the face of overwhelming difficulty, even after mistakes, even during moments of uncertainty, the path forward is always available. Allah's guidance is not restricted to those who are already perfect. It is open to those who are willing to turn back, to learn, to grow. This balance between warning and hope creates a space where transformation becomes possible, where the story does not end with judgment, but continues with the opportunity for change. In the end, the truth revealed through this journey is both simple and profound. Musa was not just a man who lived in the past. He was a sign, a living example of what it means to stand for truth in a world that often resists it. His life demonstrates that power is temporary, that arrogance leads to downfall, that sincerity is the foundation of real strength, and that trust in Allah is never misplaced. The story asks for more than admiration, it asks for response. It asks whether we will carry these lessons forward, whether we will allow them to shape our decisions, our priorities, our understanding of what truly matters. And perhaps the most important question it leaves behind is this: when the truth becomes clear to us, not through miracles we can see with our eyes, but through signs we recognize in our hearts and minds, will we accept it while there is still time, or will we delay, hoping for another moment that may never come?